In July of 1996, the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff released a document titled Joint Vision 2010, which is defined as the conceptual template for how we will channel the vitality of our people and leverage technological opportunities to achieve new levels of effectiveness in joint warfighting. It calls for the achievement of full-spectrum dominance as the primary objective of the U.S. military. Then Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Shellacashville, stated that JV 2010 created an operationally based model for the evolution of the armed forces and how to attain success in the chaos of modern warfare. A significant element in this concept was the Air Force's Global Reach program, which was headed under the Acquisition Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force. The man in charge of this department was Lawrence Delaney, a major player in the Boeing-Pentagon tanker lease agreement, and his deputy, Lieutenant General Gregory Martin. After the end of the Cold War, the need to keep nuclear forces on constant alert against a Soviet first strike, or to base large forces overseas ready to fight World War III, became redundant. However, the Air Force's inherent speed, range, precision, lethality, and flexibility was something that gave America what the Secretary of the U.S. Air Force called global reach and global power. Thus, a program was created to further develop and refine this quality. Placed under the Air Force's Acquisition Department, it was seen to fruition by men like Delaney and Martin, as were a number of other research and development branches, like the Office of Scientific Research, or AFOSR. As it turns out, this facility is located in Arlington, Virginia, the very same city where a group of Raytheon engineers were working on the guidance system for the Global Hawk. A large number of these men ended up being killed in the September 11th attacks, when their aircraft were supposedly hijacked and smashed into famous landmarks. Even more alarming, however, is the presence of a certain Brigadier General William Hodges. This individual not only has a long history with the Global Reach program, but also happened to be in command of MacDill Air Force Base, which has a number of very suspicious characteristics, placing it in the spotlight. In addition to being one of the two major military facilities that were participating in the Global Guardian exercise that day, MacDill was also undergoing a drill that simulated a hijacked aircraft being rammed into the base, which saw the whole airfield being locked down for 3 hours. When considering all the evidence which suggests that anything but a Boeing 757 hit the Pentagon, 9/11 researchers have been tasked with the obvious question: exactly what happened to Flight 77? If the contents of the declassified Operation Northwoods document are anything to go by, then it seems distinctly possible that Flight 77 was landed onto the runway of MacDill under the cover provided by that simulated plane crash. In this way, perhaps, its passengers could be detained without anyone ever knowing they had not been killed in the Pentagon explosion. It is a little-known fact that MacDill has an extensive tunnel network underneath its foundations, which were constructed at the beginning of the Cold War. Many of these have since become flooded, and almost nobody on the base realizes their existence. One would also have to take into account the presence of the Special Operations Command, a military administration that winded up leading the nation's response to the September 11th atrocities, and which had as its subordinates such fearsome units as JSOC and USASOC. The latter organization features heavily in the ring of persons implicated in this crime. Lieutenant General Brian Brown was the leader in charge of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, which was composed of 6 different mission units, 3 of which he had previously led before his posting to USASOC. Back in 1993, for example, Brown was the commander of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, or SOAR. He and his deputy, Colonel Del Daly, worked closely together during Operation Gothic Serpent, which was executed under the direction of Major General William Garrison. That mission ended in failure after the shoot-down of 2 Black Hawk helicopters in the violent Battle of Mogadishu, which was later popularized in a book by author Mark Bowden. It's worth mentioning that Garrison, the main architect of this disaster, was a famous Green Beret and Vietnam veteran, as well as an admitted participant in the joint Army-CIA venture codenamed the Phoenix Program. This background applies just as much to him as to the other men on his staff, like Colonel Thomas O'Connell or Brigadier General William Kernan. Despite serving in different units during their Vietnam tours, these individuals' wartime experience were very similar to one another, particularly in that they helped carry out a program of mass civilian murder. Operation Phoenix was responsible for identifying and neutralizing all personnel who may have been active in supporting the functioning of the Viet Cong guerrilla army in one way or another. Actions as innocuous as bartering sacks of rice with a VC affiliate could be sufficient to get someone placed on this hit list. Once targeted, the individuals would typically be subjected either to harassment, intimidation, or capture and torture. Targeted killings were also a frequent punishment. Even decorated units such as the infamous Tiger Force were not above joining in these vicious persecutions of non-combatants. More than 80,000 Vietnamese people were victimized under Operation Phoenix, with up to a quarter of them being killed. The fact that these despicable actions ended up being perpetrated again in Iraq and Afghanistan by 2 former commanders of SOAR hints at the deeply negative impression that William Garrison's presence had on that unit. The Joint Prioritized Effects List, or JPEL, is a list of individuals who have presented a nuisance to the occupation forces stationed across the Middle East. Although it is commonly believed to only apply within certain high-risk areas of Afghanistan, this hit list is actually in use across the Arab Peninsula by agents of the American Empire. Kidnappings or assassinations are known to have taken place outside of the containment areas designated by coalition armies. This shameful reality was exposed to the world in 2010 with the release of 75,000 classified documents from WikiLeaks. It was determined that after the JPEL had been authorized by JSOC brass, it was put into action by Brigadier General Raymond Palumbo, who came up with the innovative idea of setting up a death squad in the same fashion as Hitler's Einsatzgruppen and Stalin's NKVD.
The significance of this material is both the overarching context, that is, it covers the entire war since 2004, and individual events which are also significant, or a thread of events. So those include something like Task Force 373, an US-based assassination squad that goes around Afghanistan killing people on a kill or capture list. It includes significant events where many people were killed. For instance, we are looking at an event that killed 181 people at once, some by an AC-130 gunship.
Of course, back in 1996, when all this brainstorming was taking place, Palumbo was just another overly ambitious battalion commander serving with the 160th SOR. After Mr. Brown was reassigned to deputy command of the 1st ID, and Colonel Daly was promoted to replace him, a strange master-student relationship developed between these two men, which is when the morbid fixation with targeted killing started proliferating amongst the Army's special operations. No one ever said that these men lacked imagination. What is beyond dispute, however, is that this group of costumed thugs were responsible for a tremendous amount of collateral damage while operating in Iraq and Afghanistan. Task Force 373 alone is guilty of the deaths of several thousand people during the course of their operational history, for which a large number of whom there was little or no evidence confirming their sympathies with militant factions. As if that wasn't enough, they were also responsible for calling in the airstrike that killed Anwar al-Awlaki, who, despite his radical Islamic background, was a naturalized American citizen. Given all these amazing developments, one has to wonder whether any secret murder programs are in use within America, in addition to the openly acknowledged JPEL that dominates the Middle East.